Hi, and welcome to this special session of Peace Corps Week 2024 at the University of Arizona. This is a panel called Advancing Human Rights Through Peace Corps Service and more broadly international service. And we're joined by a group of returned Peace Corps volunteers and others who are affiliated with different programs at the university, affiliated with the Human Rights Practice Program, for which I work. Also, we have some alums of the Masters in Development Practice Program, which I was also previously involved with. And so I know, or at least am one degree of separation from most everybody here in the panel, and really glad to see you all. So tonight we're going to hear some stories about people's experiences and how they felt they really connected with human rights defined broadly, not just human rights law or human rights institutions, but also the practice, including at the grassroots level, maybe especially at the grassroots level of human rights. And so we have a variety of recent graduates and also faculty and staff and people who have may have served a longer ago. And so I guess the first person we'd like to ask to say a couple words is Chris Elsner, who is the organizer of the entire Peace Corps Week event and can say something to us about it.
Thank you very much, Ray. I certainly could not have done it alone, so I really appreciate the partnership with folks like Ray and Bill who help support some of our programs and activities, as well as Rose over in the Coverdell Fellowship Program as well. Peace Corps Week is really a team effort across campus, and I'm very appreciative for all of the support that I have across campus. I'm also very thankful to all of the Return Peace Corps volunteers, faculty members, staff, and alumni that Ray mentioned who are able to join us tonight. I really appreciate you all taking some time out of your busy schedules in your evening to share a little bit more about your experiences. As I sure many Peace Corps volunteers discover, human rights touches on service in many different ways. I was just quickly thinking back to my own service, and it was really the summer camps as an education volunteer in Ukraine, where I became more broadly aware of human rights issues, and that there's a whole long list of 40, 50 human rights that has been globally agreed upon, which was news to me as an American. I'm like, wait, I thought we just have the 10 human rights or the Bill of Rights. And so that was something I learned from my, counterparts and folks in Ukraine that were, teaching the full scope of human rights. So I'm very excited to hear the perspectives of others, how human rights issues touch your Peace Corps service, and perhaps how you've gone on to apply some of the things that you've learned or taken away from service to continue fantastic work, both at home and abroad. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ray, and we'll carry on. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We're going to have some opening comments from Eric Berthold in a moment, but also wanted to recognize Professor Beverly Seckinger, who is a member of our executive committee and very involved with the Human Rights Practice Program and in RPCV.
Hey, I just wanted to say a quick hello. Who was it who was also an EFL volunteer who's here recently? Or was that person unable to come?
Oh, I was a TEFL volunteer, but teacher of English as a foreign language.
TEFL, yeah. Now, yeah, it goes by many names, but yes, I too. So I was a TEFL volunteer as well from 1981 to 83 in 2 different towns in Morocco. And it was a very transformative experience, as was described in a little article that Ray pulled together, actually, of kind of testimonials from different people who had served, but I'm not on the panel, so I won't take up any time. After just briefly who I am, and what I'm doing in the Human Rights Program. So that was like immediately after undergrad, where I majored in English and French. Then immediately post Peace Corps, I in fact came to the University of Arizona as a linguistics and anthropology student. And a year and a half into that, I had another opportunity to return to Morocco and work on a literacy study for a couple of years. And by the time, and in the course of which I got involved in making a short film about that project. And by the time I got home to my anthro program, I was already kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll finish with a master's and go to film school and study documentary and then make films about all of my anthro colleagues' really cool international research experiences, which never happened, but I did go to film school, and then I found my way back here to Arizona, and where I teach in the film and television program. And I've been really thrilled to join the Human Rights Program since 2018 and teach a course called Advancing Human Rights Through documentary media. So it feels like it's all kind of come full circle, and all those experiences follow what, tie together in an interesting tapestry, and uh, connect in interesting ways. And it's especially lovely to meet younger prospective volunteers or recent volunteers, and hear what it's like. Back in those days, it took 2 weeks to get a snail mail letter from Morocco to Wyoming, where I was from. Or you could have like maybe a 5-minute phone call with your parents, and you would have to wait an hour at the post office to say, how's everybody? How's everybody? Okay, it's too expensive. I gotta go. And that was it. And I can only imagine. We kind of can't even imagine, what it would be like to have the connectivity of now and be sort of able to almost be at home at the same time when you're in the field, and all those connections. So I look forward to hearing.
Great, thank you, Bev. Yeah, the pre-internet old days. I remember them well. Thanks. And let's turn also then to Eric, who is an RPCV and the Executive Director of the Office of International Development at the University of Arizona.
Yeah, great to see you all and to hear your stories as well. My Peace Corps experience was from 1995 to 1997. I was in Eritrea. I was the first Peace Corps group in newly independent Eritrea. So it was a life-changing experience, like I think most of us experience the Peace Corps. So, speaking to the choir here, I'm sure, but for those who are considering the service, there's no better way to experience the lives of other people, and especially in the global South. It's just unique, and it's life-changing, and it was for me. I also met my wife there, so it had a lot of other benefits to me as well as just the service. But for me, Eritrea was, coming after a 30-year civil war. There was a lot of really interesting dynamics there with this newly independent country. And I thought if I could, I'd share a few pictures, because that's rather than looking at me, you could look at some pictures. So if somebody could, enable me to do that. Here we go. So just running through that. That's me. But let me put this on slideshow. Okay. So Eritrea, if you're not familiar with it, is up here in the Horn of Africa, just north of Ethiopia and Sudan. And as I mentioned, it was independent in 1991. I was a volunteer there in 1995 in the first group. So became independent after this 30-year civil war, and broke away from Ethiopia. And so, a lot of the issues there were around the culture and identity of being at war and resisting an occupier in their minds and becoming independent. So that was a big that was the context for a lot of the engagement there, which I'll talk about here a little bit. This is Nakfa. This is the town. I think this picture up in the upper right is what it looked like many years before I went. But basically everything in that surrounding area but the mosque was destroyed by Ethiopian bombers. And as you can see in the lower left, this mosque was damaged pretty severely, but it stood. And then everything sort of developed in sort of what we call sort of corrugated tin buildings and shops and things sort of to form. And now it's a full town. But as you can see in the bottom right, there was heavy fighting and destruction all over the country. It was really set back for 30 years of war. You can imagine what that does to a country and to its people. But I mentioned that the identity and culture of the war, and this picture on the left is a very iconic image of these fighters going to plant their sort of homemade flag at the top of this mountain to signify they're winning this war, and Ethiopia withdrawing from Eritrean territory. And that picture, of course, is now part of the currency there, and also on their coins and so on. So that becomes a big part of how people saw themselves as fighters and people who had emerged victorious. Eritrea had 3 million people, and Ethiopia over 150 million people. vast disparities in wealth and resources as well. One of the things that I found interesting is, these sandals that they wore, the soldiers would wear, and they didn't have a lot of money to fight this war. A lot of the war was actually fought with weapons captured from Ethiopian soldiers. And so, but they would wear these plastic sandals they call Congo, and they actually have a statue there developed on the right side picture there, that they put out just to sort of memorialize the symbolic nature of those sandals. I tried wearing them. They're super rigid and they totally cut up my feet. But if you wear them long enough, they actually, they're pretty durable and you can get around with them pretty well. But they fought a 30-year war wearing those sandals. So very resourceful, very, committed people. Another aspect of the war, which I thought was really interesting, was that women fought in the war. And they fought as soldiers, and they also supported the war effort pretty heavily. But it was kind of all hands on deck, 3 million versus 150 million. So everybody had to fight in the war. Everybody was impacted by the war. And so, women played an important part. And then during that time, women had a sort of equality with men, or, they were treated as equals in that war. And so it really transformed the identities of gender identities and what it meant to be a man and woman in that context. And so that was a really interesting thing to sort of see. And then there are some implications for how that was addressed post-war as well, that I'll get into a little bit. But that really impacted the culture there. Here's another thing that was a big emphasis out of the war was, there were a lot of people died from the war, and they were martyrs. So everybody who died during the conflict was a martyr, and they are celebrated during the Martyrs' Day. And it's a big deal. Like, that's a major holiday. The whole country rallies around and celebrates. And those who are martyrs, their graves are adorned with flowers, and they get, their names called out, and their families are supported financially by the government. And so, I at one point was in my 9th grade class, and I had asked them just, that innocent question you ask students, like, what do you want to do after you graduate? Like, what's your career path? What do you want to be? And we'd say, when I was a kid, a fireman, or I want to be an astronaut or something. And these kids raised their hand, and 75% of them said, I want to be a martyr. And it kind of blew me away. I didn't know what to say to that. I want to die in battle. But it meant that you were somebody. It meant that you had importance, that you contributed your life to this effort, and that you would be memorialized and remembered forever. So for so many students, some of them whom didn't necessarily see a career prospect for themselves, being a martyr was something that they all wanted to be. So that kind of really opened my eyes to what it means to be a citizen in that country. This is another component of sort of post-war Eritrea. So once the war was won in 1991, then the country had to be rebuilt, and so there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And so the government said all young people, I think starting at age 18, have to serve in national service for at least 2 years, and that could be anywhere around the country, but a lot of it was focused on the sort of lowland area. Very hot, very desert-like climate. They were basically conscripted. You didn't have an option. You had to do it if you were in country, or you could be put in jail. So students who look upon after graduation doing national service, and it was, for some, it was something they wanted to do to contribute, but for others it was something they feared, because the conditions were very bad. A lot of young people in the lowlands got malaria, cerebral malaria, or other diseases. Some of especially the women, were sexually harassed or even raped during that time, because they were just out in big tent communities, and there wasn't a lot of real supervision there. So it was a patriotic idea that kind of ended up feeling like a dictatorial mandate. And you see this thing in the bottom right, where as a deserter, you're shunned and by society, and you could be put in jail. But a lot of young people fled the country. If they could, they would flee the country to avoid doing national service during that time. I think it's still going on. So I think Amnesty and others have called it a human rights abuse, actually, because it's mandatory conscripted service, and there are a lot of issues that came out of that time. That's the end of my kind of slides. But I don't, not to go on and on about it, but for me, that was to experience what it meant to be living in a society that and teaching students, some of them were not much younger than me and had fought in the war and were going back to school to get an education. So for them, that was so important that they receive an education. And the school I taught in actually was about 3 kilometers from the main kind of area where they were fighting, from the front line. And so a lot of those students were sons and daughters of soldiers that were fighting on the front lines. There were orphans, many of them where their parents were killed in war, and they were basically living and continuing their education at school. And so, imagine teaching students where their life experience is having fought in a war, and now you're trying to teach them, English. It was a little hard for me to wrap my head around and to feel like I had something of value to add to them. But for them, a lot of them, English was a way out, was a way to get into university, was a way to get a better job. So they were very committed to that. And then for me personally, coming back from that experience, what I really, after that, I was really interested in this idea of war. What does that do to a society? What does that do to people? And so I thought, well, what would be the best way to learn about that? And I thought maybe it would be anthropology. So I went into a master's degree in anthropology, applied anthropology, where I studied in part, war and conflict, and I did my internship in, Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy, and I did my master's thesis on war and conflict resolution in Eritrea. And so I very much carried that forward into my education. And then later on, I went to work for a conflict resolution association in Washington, D.C. And then from there to work for a number of organizations that do international development. And I think, that experience really sort of set the foundation for that work in the future. And also for the idea that, you go anywhere and do anything. And in comparison to the lived experience of others, there's not a lot that can happen to you that is worse than having your family killed and fighting a war. So it had a profound impact on me in that way. And I've basically dedicated my career to, international development and, human rights related issues. And so my field of study has been democracy, human rights, and governance has been the focus. So I can trace that back to that time for sure. And I'll stop there. I know there are a number of other people speaking, so interested to hear your stories.
Well, powerful, Eric. Thank you. That sounds like as you said, transformative experience, to say the least. Before we go to the panelists, does anyone have any questions or comments for Eric about his presentation or his experiences?
So you were just there for two years, or did you do additional?
2 years. Yeah, just 2 years. Actually, the year after is when my wife, she came actually in my second year in that next Peace Corps group, and then her group was actually evacuated when the war in 1999, Ethiopia and Eritrea went back to war for a short period of time, and they were actually evacuated from Eritrea at the time.
Thanks, Eric. We can also loop back later in the discussion. We have 4 panelists, and so what I thought we might do is have 2 panelists speak and then have the opportunity to have some discussion, and then have the other 2 panelists speak. And the first 2 people I see on screen here are Robin and Abby. And Robin is a dual graduate of the MDP and the Master's in Human Rights Practice. Abby is a recent graduate of the Human Rights Practice Program and is the only non-RPCV, although I'm sure she shares a lot of the values of the Peace Corps. And we wanted to have a person on here who could talk a little bit more broadly about the theme of international service, and that Peace Corps isn't the only way to do that. And Chris, I know that Peace Corps Week, this is something that's been threaded through the different events as well, international service being the larger frame. So why don't we go ahead and if you can introduce yourselves first, where you served, what years, and what you're doing now. And then we would love to hear, as similarly to what Eric shared, if there's an experience that you can reflect upon that you think really demonstrated how your Peace Corps experience intersected with or helped to promote advanced human rights. So Robin, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name's Robin Al-Haddad. I am a graduate from both the Masters in Development Practice Program, as well as I had a graduate certificate in the Human Rights Practice Program, and also a Master's of Legal Studies in the Masters of Legal Studies, studying human rights law. So I'm a forever student at the U of A. But I served in South Africa, and that was from 2010 to 2012. So that was probably about 16 years or so after the end of apartheid. And so I was also an English teacher. I worked in schools and doing English literacy. And I might be slightly different than some of the other volunteers, only just because my husband and I served together. So I did have a partner in service. We did not meet in Peace Corps. We were married before Peace Corps, and we served together. Yeah, and so for me, I would say that as Peace Corps volunteers, we really put the human rights practice, into play on the ground. So in general, I'll give a couple examples. Really, I was going to talk about a couple of short examples. So first of all, as a Peace Corps volunteer, we are encouraged to stay, for example, apolitical. We're not allowed to publicly express our political opinions. We're not allowed to criticize the government in which we are living in and working in. We're not allowed to criticize cultural context of the country. So we can't be out there, on the streets protesting. We can't be out there marching in the streets. But rather we work, on the ground with people one-on-one. So for example, we may be working in countries where the communities that we serve, there might be a lot of gender-based violence that's perpetrated against women and girls. So in South Africa, where I worked and where I served, it has a very high rate of rape, sexual assault, gender-based violence against women. It has one of the highest rates in the world. It also has a lot of racism and xenophobic violence that happens there. Many adolescent girls just are face a lot of barriers just to access to education and sexual and reproductive, rights. So one of the initiatives that I was going to talk about is a Peace Corps initiative that's called Camp Glow. And so some of the other volunteers may have done a Camp Glow or heard of a Camp Glow, but Glow is it's just a, acronym for Girls Leading Our World. And so, many Peace Corps volunteers do this. I did not do this camp, but I'm just going to talk about it because it's an initiative with the purpose to kind of encourage women and young girls to become, active citizens by building their self-esteem and increasing their confidence and helping them develop life skills and doing career skills and life planning and things like that. And these clubs kind of, they're designed to give young women and girls the confidence and, kind of ability to pursue their dreams. So that was one example I just wanted to give of how Peace Corps volunteers are kind of working to, improve gender equality, in the communities where we're working. And, that's a very, it's very much at the heart of human rights values, right? Gender equality. So that was one example I wanted to give. Sorry, I'm having allergies. And the second thing that I wanted to bring up was around education. And of course, I was an education volunteer. I worked teaching ESL to students. But as a a Peace Corps volunteer working in English literacy. I was working with underprivileged youth. There are many human rights instruments that are, that recognize the right to education. So, there's like Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognizes the right to education. There's the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There's the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. There's all these human rights instruments that really recognize, the right, the fundamental right to education. But despite these kind of legal frameworks and human rights commitments, many countries make, many people globally are persistently, lack access to really adequate and equitable learning opportunities. And so I wanted to put this one quote out there. It's a quote by Kofi Annan, which is the former UN Secretary General. And I feel like it's a powerful quote to me. And he said, education is quite simply peace building by another name. It's the most effective form of defense spending that there is. And so to me, that quote like really sums up what, it sums up what Peace Corps, the purpose of Peace Corps is, the objectives of the US Peace Corps program. Education is really not, it's not only just a fundamental human right by itself, but it really impacts people's ability to attain their other human rights, their other rights. And so, we as Peace Corps volunteers, we don't expect to like have change overnight, or that, we're not going to like save Africa or save the world or something like that. We don't expect that every single effort that we're going to make or every lesson, English lesson we're teaching is, profound and transformational in some way. But really our hope is just that those kind of little things that we do day to day, and working on the ground with people directly and in communities. Hopefully that's kind of enough to stick with people in just some kind of small way. And we kind of do what we do because we believe that over time, we can kind of inspire change and hope that we kind of change the status quo in some small way. And maybe for me, it was just like, advocating for kids to, have these culturally relevant, questions on their government issued exams that were like totally irrelevant, standardized test questions that were horrible. So maybe it's just that like small change that we try to advocate for. But, it's really just those kind of little on the ground things. And, hopefully in years to come, somebody will kind of remember some of those small things that we did while we were working with them. And hopefully, that small thing will kind of encourage change over time. So yeah, that's how I see Peace Corps, kind of those two examples of how I see Peace Corps, working with human rights.
Wonderful, Robin. Thanks very much. Those are, the small things, building brick by brick, right? And it's good to be reminded of that. So great. Thank you. And let's turn to Abby, and then we'll have some discussion on Robin and Abby's comments.
Sure, thank you. My name is Abby Nelson. As it was mentioned, I'm a pretty recent graduate of the Human Rights Practice Program. I think about a year and a half ago now, October of 2022. And though I was not ever a part of Peace Corps, I think, as Ray mentioned, there are other ways to kind of have like impactful human rights related work outside of just that sort of experience or opportunity. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about my experience as a student and being a part of a research group that went to Bangladesh and worked with the Rohingya refugees that are currently living there. And I will just mention Robin was a part of that research team too. So yeah, so anyways, it was a really transformative experience that I had, essentially just to kind of go into just a little bit of background of, thank you, Robin, and Professor Bill Simmons, who's also on here right now, was a part of that research team. Just to go a little bit into just a high level like background on like what our objective was there. We were working with a really great organization called Art Illusion, and they are an international organization that does collaborative community-based art projects that really have the purpose of trying to strengthen mental health, resilience, foster social inclusion, often between vulnerable communities such as, you know, refugees and their host communities, and strengthen certain livelihood skills. So we were working with them to create a monitoring and evaluation protocol to kind of just like measure the impact that their programming has on resilience and post-traumatic growth for the Rohingya refugees that they were working with in the camps that they were living in. And I think just in general too, like our approach to working on the ground really had a human rights-based approach, which you obviously have to have when you are working in a humanitarian setting or in a humanitarian crises. And we really made sure to just like within our methods be including the community that we were working with. So we really took a community-based participatory action research approach to you know, trying to conduct our research. But outside of just having those pieces on kind of like how we were conducting our work and doing our research, I think like really what stuck with me in terms of like the way to promote human rights and how this really ties to that sort of work was really just from like the opportunities that we had with being able to hear these impactful stories that Rohingya refugee men and women were sharing with us, that we now can then, after we had, you know, left the setting that we were in with them, are able to go spread throughout the world. You know, their stories are ones that are like decades long of like persecution and genocide, and many unthinkable human rights violations that have happened to like many of the people back in their home country of Myanmar, along their journey to Bangladesh, and also while within the refugee camps in Bangladesh. So I think really, yeah, again, what stuck with me was just being able to go out and spread the word of what these people have endured, and being able to educate people more on the situation. And in turn, like that can really, like Robin said, kind of like these small steps, like you might not come back and like telling stories might have like a little bit of impact by being able to spread word, but there's a lot of opportunities that come after that with being able to like, you know, continue the research. You don't just go there, do the research, leave, and then just kind of forget about it and never, you know, touch it again. Things like that. That will then hopefully in turn, like along with spreading the word, is just like hopefully impact policy change, and being able to make conditions maybe better in the camps, maybe being able to have recommendations on like what a path forward will be for a solution, and being able to have like a human rights-based framework and approach to that. So yeah, I think that just really being able to like come back and be able to like kind of tell the stories is really what stuck with me most about being able to do that work and have that opportunity to work with the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh.
Great, thanks, Abby. I know that's a really powerful project that Professor Simmons, the director of our program, runs. Let's see if we have any other questions, but Abby and Robin, I wonder if you might want to say a couple of words each about what you're doing presently, because I think you're all doing interesting work.
Sure. I'm currently working at the University of Minnesota Law School in the Human Rights Center as the program coordinator. And I really think that honestly, like the experience of obviously getting my master's degree in the human rights practice from the University of Arizona really like led me to like come down that path. So the center I work at is a research and advocacy center, and really focuses on like human rights law and a little bit less of like the human rights practice. So it's been like really fun and interesting to be able to kind of bring like my kind of background and experience into see how like, you know, human rights law and like humanitarian international humanitarian law and kind of working in those humanitarian settings can have like a lot of like intersection and overlap. So yeah, I think that having that experience and being able to bring that to the center has been like really impactful, I think, even for like law students that I work with.
Thanks, Abby. And how about you, Robin?
Yeah, I don't know how much my current career reflects human rights, but I am currently working with Tango International, which is another acronym for Technical Assistance for Non-Governmental Organizations, or NGOs. And so I work with Tango, and we do monitoring and evaluation. I'm a research specialist there at Tango, and we work with a lot of the large NGOs and UN agencies like the World Food Program and UNHCR and things like that. We do program evaluations for them.
Great. Thanks to you both. Abby and well, we have a couple of different articles on our blog, but I'm going to include one that talks about I'm going to put it into the chat now. It's some reflections by 3 students who, including Abby, who were there in, I guess, last summer or summer before, in Time Flies, but it was not that
2022,
long ago.
it's crazy.
Yeah,
Quickly
and so
time
it's
goes
there
by.
for anyone who wants more information about the Bangladesh project. Any comments or questions or anything for Robin or Abby?
Yeah, I had a question that has come up at different times in my career, which is how do you actually monitor and measure progress in human rights? I think a lot of times when I talk to human rights defenders, it's you know, it's like that defense, like if we weren't here, things would be worse than they are now. And so, but it's hard to sort of talk about progress, especially in contexts where, like the Rohingya in Bangladesh, where it's hard to say things are getting better with all of these efforts. So did you kind of did that come up in your work at Abby?
Yeah, and I think like our kind of like output from that, it's like still kind of ongoing, right? Trying to see like what the impact is of like the programming for like the specific organization we were kind of like doing the monitoring evaluation for. And I think it's something that like if you're working in like human rights or like within like those settings, it's something that you have to, I think, understand too, that like change isn't going to be seen overnight. As like everyone here, I'm sure like knows just from all of your work too. I don't know if that necessarily like answers the question, but no, I think just having like the open mind about that, and then like constantly like, you know, we were working with like, you know, the refugee artists and kind of like, of course, making sure that we had like their input on like what we were doing and like the surveys that we were trying to create, which I think that's really important because then, you know, they're the ones that are living there. They're the ones that are like, you know, experiencing these things. And so including them in that, I think also is really important. When having these sorts of research methods, because if you're kind of coming in from the outside and you've not been like living there in like that setting, you know, you might not really know what the right questions are that you're looking for. So I think that's important when kind of thinking about like impact and being able to measure it. You need to be able to like actually like be talking with the people that are being impacted, right? So I don't know if Robin, if you have anything to add to that from kind of our experience there or not, or if
No,
that
I mean,
captured
exactly
well.
what you said, you know, it's not going to come overnight, and the best way to measure impact is by talking to folks and finding out, you know, have your situation improved over time? Do you feel like you have access to, you know, education or whatever it is that there's barriers to at the moment? Yeah, I was going to ask Bill. I think he's maybe dropped off.
Yeah, I think Bill had something else he needed to go to,
Oh,
but
okay.
was there any thoughts or comments if you want to hear more about read more about Robin's experience, I'm putting into the chat the article from the Human Rights Practice blog, which she talks about her experiences in South Africa. I realize those who are watching this this video later may not have access to those, but you can find those at humanrightspractice.arizona.edu and on our blog there. Okay, let's turn then to 2 people who I got to know in a different capacity through the Masters in Development Practice program. And I was just trying to think about whether the 2 of you might know each other or whether you narrowly missed each other in the program. I think Abdul might have graduated a couple months before Caroline came in. So anyway, introduction of the 2 of you, but would either of you like to go next?
I'm happy to start. So, hi everyone, I'm Caroline Lewis. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, doing youth development work from 2018 to 2020, so the COVID cohort. I did around 20 months of service before my service got cut short because of the COVID evacuation. I lived in a village right on the border of Poland and Ukraine, working in a school. I did a lot of work around inclusive education. It was something that was pretty new to Ukraine at the time, and kind of integrating students with different needs into the classroom. Previously, they had been at home for school, and they were really just being integrated into the public school system. And so I did a lot of professional development with educators around that. I did some work with the Sustainable Development Goals as well, trying to educate students around those. But yeah, in terms of one example for how I kind of did work around human rights when I was in Ukraine. Ukraine was one of the countries that was sponsored by the PEPFAR program. And so folks who aren't familiar with PEPFAR, I wrote it down because I'm not good at acronyms. So it's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And this was started by President George W. Bush in 2003. And Ukraine was one of those sponsored countries. And so speaking of summer camps, like Robin, we had Camp Ohalo, which was a PEPFAR sponsored camp. And this was a camp where young people who were HIV positive would come and spend some time, about a week and a half, and they would also bring a caregiver with them. This could be either a parent or a guardian, or it could be a caregiver in a different capacity, maybe a social worker, a caseworker, someone who was with them. And there were actually congruent sessions during the camp. So the Ukrainian young people would go and do typical camp activities, learn about how to manage their HIV better, do some destigmatization work around that, and some self-confidence building. And then the caregivers would be doing a congruent series of sessions around how to make sure that they're administering the medication correctly to make sure that HIV didn't progress into something more serious down the line. Doing some more intense destigmatization work so that they could be advocates for the young people that they're working with who are HIV positive. And I think when it comes down to human rights, access to care and access to healthcare is a huge human rights issue, obviously. And I think when people hear access to care, they often think like, oh, do I have a car to get to a hospital? Do I live near an ER? But I really think access to care comes down to education and empowerment as well. So knowing what you need to do to stay healthy, if you have a condition that you need to be taken care of, how to do that, and also having the confidence and feeling empowered to ask questions and having those folks in your circle that can help direct you to those answers. So yeah, I did a lot of things in Ukraine. It's a beautiful country. Obviously, things are a little bit different there now, and there are lots more human rights violations happening at the current time. But in terms of the work that I did, I would say the public health aspect and access to care was a really large one for me. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Caroline. We'll definitely want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about a place like Ukraine. And Chris served there, and I think Eric, you've had connections as well. So maybe we can, one of the things we have in the Human Rights Practice Program is a cooperation with a university in Ukraine, which has been really quite an experience to interact with them and the fortitude that the people there have. But before we go into any further comments or questions, let's turn to Abdul as our last panelist. So thanks, Abdul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul, or the longer Abdul Fattah Sigal. As Ray mentioned, I did my master's in development practice 2018-2020. Actually, the graduating cohort when COVID shutdown happened, I remember in March, and we were like the first one who graduated virtually. So yeah, I did that, but rewinding a little bit back, so I served Peace Corps in Ghana as an agriculture advisor between the year 2013 and December 2015. Then I extended for one more year and finished up January 2017. So as an agriculture volunteer, as a Peace Corps first volunteer, as many of you know, we are a jack of all trades, kind of, which we do a whole lot of things at the grassroots level. We more empower as opposed to try, to solve a bigger picture. So that's why, going into my community, the first thing, you see human rights as a broader issue, including, as an agriculture volunteer, for me, my focus of work was anything that involves agriculture. So I saw, the right for, adequate food is one, the human rights. So pretty much it hits you on the face when you get into the villages. So I can mention a couple of examples where this human rights, multiple actually human rights issue, including the right for education or food, as well as health, all kind of interrelate. So one good example for this is I served in the northern part of the Ghana, which is, to be specific, Upper West region, a very remote, harsh environment, and the poorest region in the whole Ghana. And there, obviously, a subsistence farming-based economy. And on top of that, I mean, farming season is very short, so the dry season is very, very long, which leads to shortage of food and a lot of idle time and all that. On top of that, I mean, so women, we realized, I mean, volunteers also, like women usually carry the most burden when it comes to that tough part of the year, where they would play like the provider, the nurture, and all kind of things. So I mean, like I pinpointed, maybe, okay, be creative and start focusing working with women. So I saw individual women carrying shea nuts to process shea butter the way they do. So we sourced a little bit of money from Peace Corps and started this shea butter processing group with the idea of them not only providing nutritionally, as well as economically, like supporting, because they're the ones who pretty much pay for the school for the kids and providing for the men in those harsh times. So I mean, so that gave me like the bigger picture. Okay, we're empowering women here as a Peace Corps volunteer, like to our extent of ability, and that could trigger a whole lot of benefits. So, but then again, as it's a human right, because unfortunately, where I was, I mean, the people in power is a very hierarchical, I mean, patriarchal community. So they were questions raised and all that. So with those all challenges, I mean, like we managed, I mean, to actually include few men within that shea butter processing group, and it worked. And they saw the benefit. So I see this as a very good example of like how you can empower one part of the community, which can trigger a whole lot of even human rights situations addressed right there. The other example I can give is like the phenomenon, what they call in local language, kayeyes. Kayeyes are women headquarters in the major cities, including Accra, the capital, and Kumasi, the second biggest city. Those women, majority of them are young kids, young girls, who mostly drop out of school from rural north and come down to the southern cities I just mentioned to work as a headquarters for shoppers. So they carry their loads in a big bucket on their head, and for a small amount of fee. But the problem is, this is like a situation where they will be exposed for a whole lot of problems, including like rape and a lot of situations. So they may not even have a place to sleep and all that. So that opens up a whole lot of like human rights situations right there. And I didn't work actively on that, but during my time, there was a PCV media group, excellent group, where they produced this video in 7 languages, northern languages, and translated, which addresses, just to create that space where to make people aware of the phenomenon itself, or the larger Ghanaians, as well as just as conversation starter. And it was, I believe, a big success for doing so. I will drop the link in the as a YouTube open video, and anybody can see it. So it's an amazing work by that group. So that directly tells you how Peace Corps can advance human rights in one way or another, because we're like in a tricky space, right? I mean, like earlier it was mentioned, you don't want to delve in, like we will be told that don't mess up with the local politics, not only like the bigger politics, including like nuclear family level, like the hierarchy and all that. So you have to walk that thin line and make sure, you're not crossing it. So, but this kind of, productions like the Kayeye video is a huge success in my opinion. And I believe I'll leave it at that. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Abdul and Caroline. So let's just open it wide open, and we certainly include those who are not on the panel, which are we outnumber the people on the panel, outnumber those who aren't. But those of you who are in the, so to speak, audience, we would be interested to hear your thoughts, and if you'd like to introduce yourself or ask a question or make a comment or something, of course, we'd like to hear from you as well. Caroline, I would be interested to know if you've continued to hear back from Ukraine and what the story is about the place where you were and the country in general.
Yeah, so I am still really close with my host family. Thankfully, like I said, I lived in the western part of Ukraine, right on the Polish border. And so things are a little bit different there in terms of what the conflict looks like than in the southern and eastern regions. Obviously, they're still being affected, but it's not necessarily the full-blown warfare that we're seeing in other areas, right? But I think they're seeing a lot of the social and economic effects of war. Like, it's very difficult to find work. Even if you're going abroad, it's very difficult. Lack of resources in terms of food and supplies and gasoline for your vehicles, those sorts of things. Definitely, I think there's a general fear of the draft. And so obviously men, not being able to really leave the country unless they're with family, and kind of the anxiety around that. I did have some family that was in the southern region of Ukraine around Odessa, which is near, it's in the southern part of the country. And a lot of them ended up relocating west. But the relocation process is obviously a traumatic one. Even if you are kind of refugee status within your own country, it's a huge move. Ukraine is a large country. It's the size of Texas. And so the relocation burdens there, obviously are very high. This is just obviously speaking from the experiences of folks that I know that live there. But I would say a lot of young Ukrainians are engaging in a lot of activism, which I think is actually really empowering for them. There are a lot of opportunities for them to kind of advocate for the country in terms of getting more funding, doing fundraising, that sort of thing, and really rallying together, especially in the university settings. So really getting to see young people be empowered to make change and make things better has been really inspiring. On a personal note, I'm sponsoring my host family to come to the States through the United for Ukraine program. So at first it was one, and then as Ukrainians go, now it's like 5 of them. But that's just how things tend to go. So they're going to be in Chicago, which has the highest population of Ukrainians in the country, which is awesome. And so hopefully that process will move quickly. So I think obviously the Ukrainians that are able to get out of the country if they can, they're lucky to be able to do so. But yeah, I think a lot of the work that Peace Corps volunteers did in Ukraine, seeing areas where we lived that are now destroyed, the hotel that we stayed in for pre-service training is destroyed, that sort of thing. It's just a hard thing to see. But I think I see in my students, the ones that I was able to work with and form relationships with, I hope are more resilient or able to think about things a little bit differently because of the work that I was able to do with them, even in a small way. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Caroline. And I actually also wanted to ask, as I did with Abby and Robin, would you want to say a word, Abdul and Caroline, about what you've done since the degree and what you're doing now?
Sure. After this, I'll stop talking. So I currently work for the Pima County Health Department. And so I'm the Community Engagement Program Manager in our new Office of Policy, Resilience, and Equity. This is an office that just got stood up in November of 2023. The health department is really looking to take a more systems change approach to how we do public health throughout the county. And a lot of the work that I do revolves around our community health needs assessment, which is an assessment that happens every 3 years in collaboration with our nonprofit hospitals, our community-based organizations, and the health department to really work with community members to define what are the health priorities for the county. And it's actually really interesting, speaking about the PEPFAR work that I used to do, the same types of public health human rights issues are happening in Pima County when it comes to access to care, social determinants of health, mental and behavioral health. All of these things are things that Pima County residents are seeing as priorities as well, especially around access to care when it comes to just knowing when you're going to a primary care provider, what do you ask? Those are questions I got in Ukraine too. And so really seeing the parallels in the work I'm doing now with public health and access to care and the work that I was doing in Ukraine has been really exciting. And it makes you realize that 2 places aren't also different sometimes when it comes to healthcare. So.
Great, thank you, Caroline. And Abdul?
Yeah, I'm working right now at the US EPA here, Region 9, San Francisco office in the environmental justice section. And pretty much it's a continuation of what I've been working during my Peace Corps time too. So mainly I'm a project officer and mainly work on environmental justice grants for government entities as well as community-based organizations. Beside that, I also serve as a EJ coordinator for my geographic coverage area, which is the Sacramento mainly area, where I work with EJ partners there, and I serve as a liaison, link them with resources, hear their issues, and link them with like divisions, like it could be the air division or land or anything. And also a whole 9 yards. So I'm an EJ coordinator and project officer at the same time. Yeah.
Great. Well, how about if we just open it up in general to anyone who's got comments or questions for any of our panelists? Or
I just have a comment based on something, Caroline, you said about just like your work and kind of seeing how there's maybe some similarities in Pima County as there were to like in the Ukraine. And I think that's something like, even though we're all obviously like we've done like international like human rights related work, all of us here on the panel, even something in like my work at the Human Rights Center and just in human rights in general, we tend to think it's like, oh, like this a broad thing so far away, like not here in the US. And I think it's something that we really try to like bring ourselves to focus on, is just like there are kind of some of these parallel issues and barriers that are happening here like at home too. So I think it's just like interesting to point out.
exactly.
So I have a question for the panelists, particularly for undergraduate students who might be thinking about international service, Peace Corps service. For any of you, is there anything that you can call back to or refer from your undergraduate degree programs, careers, studies that in any way prepared you for working on human rights issues or Peace Corps service, or any kind of connection you can make there? Or if not a direct connection, is there any advice that you could give to undergraduate students who are thinking about careers in international service, careers related to human rights or Peace Corps?
I would give the advice of just volunteer, just go out there and volunteer, just like, you know, Abby and Caroline are talking about. A lot of these issues are right here in our home communities. And I think just starting with that, you know, starting with volunteering and seeing, you know, what some of the issues are and getting some experience. And, you know, I kind of started out, I initially worked for IRC, the International Rescue Committee, and I was teaching English for a lot of refugees that were coming into the country. And so that kind of propelled me into being very interested in human rights and working with refugees, you know, so just, yeah, just going out there, volunteering, working with people on the ground. And then, you know, that definitely will help you with your Peace Corps application as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I went to Boston College for my undergrad, and they have a really robust Peace Corps recruitment program. And so being able to talk with a recruiter about what the Peace Corps experience would be like, get connected to RPCVs. Boston College didn't have a covered out program, but I definitely would have utilized the folks who were in that program just to hear about their experiences. Because I think in reality, Peace Corps is not for everybody, right? And knowing that before you go in is way better than getting there and thinking, oh my gosh, this is so not for me. But for some people, it's a perfect fit, right? And so getting to really talk to a recruiter, talk to folks who have been through it and maybe been through it in different areas as well. Because I know of around the world, Peace Corps sites can be very different. And so thinking about what would be a good fit for you and where you could really make the most impact, it really helps to just be able to talk to other folks who have gone through it. So.
I'll say, I guess from like my perspective, since I wasn't in Peace Corps, that like as a student in the master's program, you know, just making sure that you're making really good connections with your professors. Like I think that if you're looking to kind of do like international human rights related research, You know, like I mentioned, I was a part of like a research team through being a student. So I think that making those connections, and if you find like a topic that you're really interested in, just making sure to connect with, you know, those professors or people, and you know, kind of keep those relationships. It can really obviously like help with different opportunities that could be presented to you.
Yeah, Abby.
Okay, I will go, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I would say if you like into like helping people, there's a whole lot of things you can do out there, and one perfect gateway is Peace Corps. And like it was mentioned, yeah, go out, volunteer. I mean, like for me, I was lucky enough. I mean, like I met a recruiter, and I ended up talking to him whom he served in Cameroon, and it was an eye opener. Like I'm like, okay, even though I was born in Africa and relatively I can do that too. So another message I want to give is like it's for everyone. I mean, even my background, any background, anybody can do it. So I mean, like so don't anything hold you down. Go out there, experience, and yeah. You can, yeah. Thank you.
Go. Robin or anyone else? Okay, if not, Chris, was there something you wanted to?
Yeah, I do have another question, so we got a few more minutes here. So related to kind of working with human rights issues in particular, it can, or I imagine it can be very emotionally taxing to work with these populations and see suffering and issues firsthand. How do you all deal with it? How do you all kind of process that? I know, you know, in practice that can be challenging, and you know that kind of stress also affects, you know, Peace Corps volunteers as well when you're in communities and trying to integrate, and it's a little bit different. But I'm just kind of curious of what are all your approaches to dealing with that kind of emotional fatigue and stress from the related work.
I can speak to that. I think when you're in country, and like you said, Chris, when you're learning the language, when you're adjusting to the new food, when you're meeting all of these people that you don't know, everything is heightened, right? So things that you might be able to deal with in the moment may affect you more than you think that they would. So I think just giving yourself grace and letting yourself feel what you're feeling is really important. I think a lot of Peace Corps volunteers go in and think they have to have this like grit, which I don't like that word to begin with, but it's okay to feel sad and it's okay to feel angry, but being able to kind of process those things with the other Peace Corps volunteers that you're with, and kind of thinking about how to move beyond that and make change where you can, I think is really important. But I think trying not to mask that, you know, sometimes you're going to be affected by things emotionally when you're in country, whether it be human rights related things or other things like missing your family or not liking the food or whatever it might be, but really letting yourself process those things and trying to think of, you know, small things that you can do to make a difference too. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know, Abby, if you want to jump in. I know we had some emotional trauma, some issues, you know, around some of the work that we did in the refugee camps, you know, and really hearing people's stories, like real life stories. And yeah, and just to kind of go off of what Carolyn was saying was, you know, just having another person there that you can talk to and just kind of process that, you know, what you just heard and what, you know, what you just experienced, you know, is, you know, there's just no other way to really process it without kind of talking your way through it and thinking about it. So I don't know, Abby, if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, and I remember a specific instance when we were in Bangladesh where like you know, when you're there, like hearing these stories from people, like you have to keep it together, like while you're, you know, with them and talking to them. You can't just start crying on the, you know, the spot, and, you know, have to be strong in that sense. But then once we had like left for the, you know, night, 'cause we had to leave the camps at certain times, like I remember just like breaking down and crying. And I think like having like obviously a strong support system and like people there with me, like Robin and Professor Sibbins and like the rest of our team, that like, you know, we can process these things together, like like Caroline said, it's like you can be sad. It's okay. Like, you know, we're humans, we have emotions. You don't have to like act like, you know, it's not like the things that you're seeing and the things that you're hearing or any other factors aren't affecting you. So I think, yeah, giving yourself grace and like understanding too that like you're not going to in that moment like change what's happening. You're not going to be able to like, you know, save the world and kind of like make all these changes happen right away. So just like having that understanding, because I think that was something that was hard for me to grapple with once I returned back home here to the US. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like what can I do? Like how can I make more of an impact? And like I think that's like a really obviously a great thing to like want to do, but also realizing too that like you're one person and these things take time, and you know, we're all doing the best we can doing this kind of hard work.
Yeah, and I would also just add, just knowing that none of us are going to be able to change the past and what, you know, things that had happened to other people in the past, and but just kind of looking forward and having that forward thinking and how can we make things better in the now, you know, or in the future, and just kind of thinking that way rather than, you know, thinking that there's something that we can do to change anything that happened in the past, because obviously we can't.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, just giving yourself grace in that sense. And yeah, I think that's my advice, I guess.
I would just like to say that until I got to the University of Arizona, which has a large RPCV community, I've never met so many RPCVs and realized how terrific you folks really are. And I don't know whether it was the experience that made you terrific, or it was the fact that you were terrific that got you to go into the Peace Corps in the first place, or some combination thereof. But it's really been a pleasure to hear the stories and to find out about the complicated work. And sometimes it was this very quotidian, day-to-day, you know, you're not changing the world, and yet, you know, are you? As you know, part of that larger effort. And Professor Seckinger, who had to leave at 7 o'clock, but she posted a note into the chat that I'd just like to read. She said, "I find it really inspiring to hear the stories of younger generations who are committed to human rights and social change and doing work in service to humanity so many decades after the idealistic founding of Peace Corps in the early 60s. It gives me hope for the future." And so I thought that might actually be a good note to wrap up on, because I think it is about, you know, and it dovetails nicely with what Robin said. You can't change the past, but that's not necessarily true about the future and the possibilities. So I hope the future, in the future, when people at University of Arizona or beyond, when students or others have the opportunity to hear these comments that you've made, it will inspire them to to look into Peace Corps and other modes of international service. So that's great.
Thank you.
So we'll call it a night then. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us, and appreciate your all time and yeah, sharing your perspectives.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks. Bye.